Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of the lectures over the Abrahamic faiths, those that follow the God of Abraham, which would be Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And so the first one that we're going to look at is Judaism, and I have here on the screen Judaism's most well-known symbol, the Star of David. And I have down here below the Star of David the statement, by David's shield you are protected. Most people can tell me that this symbol is the Star of David. Most people can tell me that. But if I was to ask them what is the meaning behind it, not too many people can give me an answer. Well, the meaning behind it is that supposedly this symbol was on the shield of King David, the king of the ancient kingdom of Israel. And the idea is that if you wear this symbol, you are protected by the shield of David. So what we're going to look at here with this first lecture, with Judaism, is some basic knowledge of the Bible and the Torah, or the law, which for Jews is the most important portion of their scriptures. Their scriptures, which Christians commonly refer to as the Old Testament. But before we get into that, there is something that I want to mention. We are entering a portion of the class that has a connection to people personally. We live in a part of the world which is predominantly Christian. Christianity, of course, comes out of Judaism. Christians have taken sacred scripture of the Jewish people and incorporated it into their own canon of scripture, which they, in this case, refer to as the Old Testament, and they refer to their specific scriptures as the New Testament. And it's also an area where, I have encountered people getting a lot more defensive. When I taught the courses over the Bible, and I believe this was the New Testament class, I had a student respond back on some particular point. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was how if you don't personally believe in the Bible, you cannot understand it. Okay. When we finished up that very first lecture over the common terms of religion, one of the people whom I'm certain that I referenced was Bart Ehrman. Ehrman is one of the best New Testament scholars around, but Ehrman is not a Christian. He identifies himself as an agnostic atheist, and ultimately, it was the issue of theodicy, the problem of evil, that got to him. Well, during the interview with NPR, where he talked about all this, at the end of the interview, the person asked him, "Are you ever asked about the fact that you are an expert on the Bible, but that you don't personally believe in it?" And he said, "Yeah, I get asked that quite a bit." And then the following question was, "Well, what is your response?" And he stated, "Well, it's all part of our culture. I mean, whether I personally believe in it or not, it doesn't change that fact." And, that's an important point to mention, is that so much of our Western culture comes from two areas. One is Athens, with individuals named Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and the other would be Jerusalem, which was the area of, or the capital more specifically, of the ancient kingdom of Israel, and then later it becomes the capital of the kingdom of Judea, where the people whom we call the Jews derive their name from, the people of Judea. So, I mean, whether you personally believe in, these particular scriptures or even, these particular religions doesn't really change, that fact. To add on to that, let's say that I was to ask you if you believe in ghosts. Chances are good some of you would say no. Okay, you don't believe in ghosts. You don't believe in basically disembodied people or disembodied whatever. Okay. Does that mean, by definition, you cannot appreciate and understand a story which features ghosts? Like, for example, does that mean that you cannot appreciate or understand Shakespeare's Hamlet or Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, both of which feature ghosts? Or that likewise, you cannot appreciate or understand Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, which also features ghosts? I would say no. Well, same thing basically applies here. So I just wanted to say that to get that potential point that could come up out of the way. So, we'll beginning here with some key terms and concepts, and you probably also see on the screen I have a cross, Christianity's most well-known symbol. There's going to be a little bit of connection here, crossing over, I guess you could say, between the two religions, because, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, Christianity comes out of Judaism, and, one of the things that Christians have done unique is that they've taken another group's, sacred scripture and basically incorporated it into their own, which they refer to this particular sacred scripture as the Old Testament. And, when we looked at, Buddhism, I mentioned how, Buddhism comes out of Hinduism, but the Buddhists reject the Vedas, the Hindu sacred scripture. Christians don't reject the sacred scripture of the Jews, the Tanakh. They refer to it as the Old Testament. But starting off here, you've got the word Bible. Well, in Greek, the word Bible refers to a collection of books. The word Bible in Greek is Biblios. I'm going to teach this portion a little bit different than I would in my seated environment in hopes to keep the timing down a bit here, but one of the things that I would often do in the seated class is I would read from the end of the book of Revelation, where the author, John of Patmos, talks about how, if you add to the words of this book, God will add onto you all the plagues that are described in it, and if you take away the words of this book, God will basically take you out of your share in the tree of life. And there are a lot of individuals that think that what John of Patmos was talking about was the Bible as a whole. Well, no, he wasn't. The Bible, as we would currently conceive of it, did not actually exist yet. We'll get to that point later. There was a certain group that John of Patmos was referring to, whom we'll also get to, but as a whole, he was referring to his particular work, the Book of Revelation. And he was attempting to scare a particular group of people from changing that work. And due to the different manuscripts of the book of Revelation, he was not successful. Well, the Bible, as we would currently conceive it, both the Jewish and the Christian scriptures, would have its origins with the canon. Canon refers to rule or standard, set by Saint Athanasius of Alexandria in the year 367 CE or AD. And let me have a little sip of water here, and I'm going to focus on this point. This would be more so with the Christian rather than the Jewish. But Athanasius, he was the Bishop of Alexandria, which was a very prominent see, bishopric. The only bishop at this time that would have been more prominent than him would have been the Roman bishop, whom we commonly refer to as the Pope. And essentially, this is from his Easter letter, where he lists the 27 books of the New Testament from the Gospel of Matthew to the book of Revelation. And essentially, this carried on throughout the Christian world and became accepted. Now, among the Hebrew scriptures, or what Christians would call the Old Testament, Christians have some variations there. But in terms of the New Testament, they all agree on the same 27 books. There are those that have tried to make the case that the Bible, as we currently would conceive of it, is something that you could, potentially hold in your hand, is older than Athanasius. I was reading some historians trying to argue that Origen, who was also from Alexandria, he was a presbyter/priest, that he had essentially the New Testament canon prior to this. The only problem with that is that Origen's list is not entirely clear. He mentions these letters of Paul, but he doesn't state specifically which ones they are, whereas Athanasius in his list has them there entirely. So, anyway, I think that we'll stop at this point, and then when we come back, we will continue on with the key terms and concepts, and of course also with the first portion of Judaism. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.